Hi, this is Ms. Hadi from Olympian High School. I'm going to use the Traditions and Encounters textbook by Dr. Bentley to teach you the first 5 slides of the Chapter 37 PowerPoint. This is about World War II. New conflagrations means new fires, things that are burning down. And it's going to start with a look at Japanese aggression in China, which you've already studied in the past, looking at the Mukden incident. So using the book is a little bit different than using the PowerPoint. So with the PowerPoint, they talk about the fact that there are going to be 2 major sides in this hostility. There's going to be the Allies versus the Axis powers. So on the Axis side, you have Italy, Germany, and Japan. We're going to study Japan's opening shots in the war first. They're revisionists because they wanted to revise the post-World War I peace treaties. Initially, the Allied side, which is going to include quite a few people, and eventually also the United States, don't do much to stop the aggressive expansionist policies of the Axis powers, but eventually they'll stop the policy of appeasement, which is allowing them to do certain aggressive acts and appease them, hoping that that would keep them at bay and stop them from further aggressive actions. There's a big problem with this PowerPoint. It tells you that the war erupts in 1939, and that's not how I want you guys to remember World War II beginning. We want to think of World War II as beginning in 1931 with Japanese actions in China with Manchuria. And it's going to open in Europe in 1939, but we want to keep ourselves from being Eurocentric. So if you study World War II with the invasion of Poland by the Nazis, that's where most historians usually start World War II, but we need to remember that for AP World History, we start in 1931. It becomes global by 1941. It's over by 1945. Here you can see flags of the different Axis powers at a major rally in Tokyo. So you've already learned in the past about China's invasion of Manchuria following the Mukden incident, 1931, 1932. They're going to launch a full-scale invasion in 1937, and we'll see lots of horrendous civilian acts of violence against civilians, especially in Shanghai and in Nanjing. Aerial bombing killing thousands of people, 400,000 Chinese being used as bayonet practice. So really unnecessary, terrible violence used against people for no reason. How many women were raped is debatable. Your book cites 7,000 women, but there's another book that was really powerful that I read in graduate school by a woman named Iris Chang. She wrote this book called The Rape of Nanking. And if I remember correctly, and I hope I'm not misspeaking, I think she says the number is closer to 200,000 women. And there's pictures in that book that are really powerful that show the Japanese killing babies and doing all kinds of terrible atrocities. They had a sense of nationalism that made them feel superior to the Chinese. Iris Chang eventually kills herself. She commits suicide. And many people say, including the person who wrote this particular article, that it's partly because of what she experienced, the powerful emotions of witnessing senseless violence and trying to bring that forward in a community that often denies that this historical massacre occurred. There's lots of Japanese history books that gloss over this period of history or deny that it happened. So you can read more about Iris Chang. And normally, if in a non-COVID year, I have a collection of these books in my classroom, and with parent permission, because it is so graphic, you can read this book and do a small report for extra credit. Okay, so the Rape of Nanking. We'll come back to the reading. First, I want to stay with the PowerPoint. So many women raped, many homes destroyed, burned, or destroyed. So Japan, we want to think of World War II as starting with the Japanese aggression and expansion into China. Then Japan signs a 10-year tripartite pact with Germany and Italy, and a non-aggression pact with the USSR in 1941 so that it can have a free hand in Manchuria. This has an effect. It creates a sense of unity amongst the communists and nationalists that up until this point had been warring in China in a civil war, but they decide that it's important that they have a united front, so to speak, quote unquote, against the Japanese. So temporarily, Chinese communists and nationalists work together. It doesn't always go perfectly well. Sometimes they fight each other anyway. But the Chinese nationalists are going to still use the Gaomindang to try to rule and fight against the Japanese, and the communists also use guerrilla warfare to tie down a lot of the Japanese army. It's not that they, are best friends. They continue to clash with each other, but they're working together to try to stave off the Japanese threat. Now, towards the end of the war, the communists have become very popular for some types of land reform that they tried to introduce with the peasants and for standing up against the Japanese. And so at the conclusion of the war, the communists were poised to take over China. Okay, and we'll stop right there for now. Actually, I'll open the book and look at some things that I think you'll need to know. So you have the beginning of the book talking about the dropping of the bomb, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's the use of atomic weapons is going to be something that we'll look at towards the end of the chapter. And then it goes into sort of how long the war lasted, again, making sure that we know that it starts in our class in 1931. So much earlier than traditionally is considered when people study World War II. And then it talks about how at the conclusion of the war, we see the opening of the Cold War, which is a conflict between communist countries and capitalist democratic countries. And the strength of the United States as a capitalist democratic country and the strength of the Soviet Union and later China. China's also going to become communist at the conclusion of World War II, the beginning of the Cold War. So we know what the word revisionist is. We looked at Japanese aggression in China. I should mention to you that there were forces within Japan that were non-militaristic, but this militarist position became stronger, and that's what led to this ultra-nationalist pro-military policy that ended up taking Japan into a conflict with China. Here we talked about Chinese resistance already. You can see Japanese men training, and we'll pick up with this next part on Italian and Japanese aggression in the next video.